Welcome everyone to the Justice series led by Harold Rosen. Again, my name is Dora Lee Harrison, and I want to just start us off by a land acknowledgement in appreciation of the ancestral and unceded territories that we are gathering in. I know that where I'm sitting right now here, I am on the Coast Salish lands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And many of you are on the land of other nations, and you're welcome to add the names of those nations into the chat so that we might uplift and remember the ancestral lands and the present day people who are living in those places and stewarding those places as well, and helping escort us and guide us settlers as we learn to become in relationship and help in healing colonial ills and harms. And may that we all in our work and our private lives and our professional lives continue to do that important work. And someday we may live together in good relations. So thank you all for being here with the Living Interfaith Sanctuaries Justice series led by Harold Rosen. I'm very excited to be leading this morning, or just helping support Harold anyway. He's going to be leading this morning. I'm just here from a technical side of things. So I'm happy to turn it over to Harold now at this point. So thank you and enjoy your course.
Thank you so much, Dora Lee. Yeah, I really believe in acknowledgments. I get nervous and forget about them, though, sometimes. Where I am, it's Chemainus and Cowichan people. And it's especially important because today we're going to look at indigenous systems of justice historically, and a few other ancient ones, or ones that go very far back. I wanted to reintroduce the course as a whole, though, because we're 2 weeks apart, so I just wanted to say a little bit about the course as a whole. So last week I mentioned that there might be different motivations for people taking a course like this. And I mentioned that you might be hoping to restore your faith in humanity, given, the events in the world. You might want to, restore your faith in progress and that sort of thing. You might be wanting to craft a fair view of today's global challenges. You might have interest in the big picture and surveys of knowledge and that sort of thing. You could be perplexed, like everyone else is, maybe, about the nature of justice. What is it? To whom does it apply? And that sort of thing. How can we build a world that acknowledges ethno-cultural diversity and biodiversity into one sort of macro justice system? Is that even possible? You might want to clarify your sense of what you can do to make the world a better place. So we'll be exploring ideas, but ideas have, implications for practice and service. So I'm hoping these are some of the motivations you might bring to the table. I gave you a slideshow that had 25 slides, and that introduced the content of the course. I'm hoping you keep that slideshow and go back to it, and that the slides will have more and more meaning because of our discussion in this series. The second slide mentioned something very foundational, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's foundational from my point of view, and that is, I called it Hypotheses on the Origin and Destiny of Justice Concepts. Where do justice concepts come from most broadly? And my simple answer for that is religion. It seems to me that, religions or spiritual traditions have generated concepts of social order, law, and justice. Most of the world religions and spiritual traditions expect leaders or rulers to be just. So concepts of justice and law generally come from the world religions. At least that's the hypothesis I've been using to develop this course. Some of you might know my background is in world religions and in history of ideas, as well as history of civilizations. So I'm trying to build a bridge between some things I knew before to a relatively new area to me, law and justice. I'm not a lawyer, don't have a law background, but I'm hoping courses like this attract lawyers who want to think, more broadly and can bring some interesting specifics to the table. And I'm hoping courses like this attract social activists of different kinds, people that want to find common ground and, build a more just world. Okay, that introduces some of what I was talking about last week. I want to mention a few other things, or not last week, last session. The first session I also mentioned that you have an outline of the whole course. I tried to show you the subtopics of each of the 8 sessions. And last time I mentioned there was a section of the notes 2 weeks ago called Historic Threats to Justice and Generic Responses. So that was a list of terms going on for a page and a half in little groups. For example, the first one had divine right of kings as something I view as problematic. And then the response to that has been constitutional monarchy or democracy as responses. So I put terms, and I mentioned 2 weeks ago, I underline in red things that I think are problematic. For example, here are some problematic concepts and realities in human history: slavery, oppression, colonialism. And then the positive responses have been abolition and liberation. A problematic reality has been patriarchy, and one of the responses has been women's suffrage. A problematic reality has been autocracies of different kinds, and democracies are I believe, constructive responses to autocracy. And then I gave you a bunch of, I listed some ideologies. And in my mind, ideologies has a specific meaning. It's sort of like a worldview that makes an absolute claim to some extent and functions like a religion. So an ideology could be nationalism or fascism, communism, socialism, capitalism, technocracy, and Islamism. Those are examples of ideologies which function in making an absolute claim on society. And I think that they're problematic. All of them also are justice claims. So, in other words, justice claims can be positive and negative and everywhere in between. We're mostly looking at positive things, the highest concepts that have been taught to humanity down through the ages. We're emphasizing those, and we're showing how those are needed because humanity has a way of sliding backwards, right? Perhaps it's called sin, missing the mark. We have high ideals. We get revelation or guidance, divine guidance, in different forms, and we implement it for a while and can create magnificent civilizations up to a point, and then we digress and seem to need another lesson in justice and guidance of the virtues and that sort of thing. You know, last time I also provided a generic definition of justice. And I just want to remind you, if this were a real course where you have to take a test and it goes on and on, I might have asked you, write down what you think justice is. Before we even gathered, I might have said, write a paragraph on justice. And then I would like you to have, revisited that paragraph at the end of this course and see what happened to your concept of justice. That would be very interesting. I put down, so I gave in my list of terms, foundational terms, justice, a moral spiritual ideal, as well as a concrete social process, providing wide participation, affording basic rights, requiring basic duties, encouraging cooperation, fostering optimal degrees of freedom and equality, appropriate rewards and punishments, seeking restoration, virtuous conduct, and a flourishing society. Wow, that's a lot. Now, that's only my concept of justice, as I had it before this course began. And I do see it as something that's a high ideal on one hand and a struggle to shape society and individuals in society on the other hand, right? So there's been lots of ups and downs in humanity's struggle with and for justice. Okay, but freedom and equality are in there. Rewards and punishments are in there, usually. Duties and responsibilities and reward and benefits, things like that are balanced. There's an attempt to balance all these things to meet most people's needs in concepts of justice. Okay, I want to say something about that outline I gave you that outlines the whole course. You know, there is this thing called Eurocentrism, and it's hard to escape it. It's like we live in the West, and we mostly speak English and other languages, and so we look at the world from a Western point of view. I like to believe that, in my courses, world religions, concepts of the afterlife, etc., I'm always trying to overcome Eurocentrism by looking at culture and religions broadly, different worldviews from different parts of the world. This is why I moved to Vancouver 35 years ago. I wanted to swim in multicultural waters. So yeah, there is a lot of diversity in our part of the world. Okay, so yeah, this course is today's session. We're going to look at ancient and indigenous concepts of justice. The very next session, we'll go over to South Asia. We'll look at concepts of justice that have come from the Indian subcontinent, out of Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and Sikhism, as well as in China too, Confucian and Taoist concepts. We're going to touch on all that next session, December 14th. So between this session on indigenous and ancient cultures and the one looking at South Asian concepts and East Asian concepts, and then the following session, the fourth one, looks at Middle Eastern concepts of the ancient Persian or Zoroastrian variety and Islamic concepts of justice. So that was my naive belief that if we delved into indigenous, Far Eastern, and South Asian concepts, as well as Middle Eastern concepts, that this would cure us of Eurocentrism. Well, it probably takes more than that, but at least that's the beginning, right? It's the beginning of overcoming a Eurocentric view of the history of justice. So a lot of people might start a series on justice, just looking at colonial systems of justice. They might start right there, as if that were the most important part of world history. When the world was colonized by 4 or 5 great powers in Europe. You could start a study of justice there, but I'm trying to take a different approach and go much wider. Okay, all that's a reintroduction to the course. I want to say a little bit about, I've given you 7 pages for today, right? And it's called, we're calling it Indigenous and Ancient Views of Justice, 7 pages. I'm going to just touch on the first few pages and then stop. And I'm hoping, it will stimulate comments and questions. And especially, I think a lot of us probably have experience with indigenous cultures and peoples, land acknowledgements, truth and reconciliation projects of various kinds. We might have been part of them. We may know indigenous people. I now live on Vancouver Island. There's 9 or 10% of the population is indigenous. So I'm actually bumping into indigenous people, all over the place, in working with restorative justice a little bit, and in going to multicultural events and just shopping. I'm actually seeing indigenous people, and this is experience that I've always wanted to have, and it didn't happen as much when I lived on the mainland. So that's a big opportunity to live, on Vancouver Island, at least from the point of view of learning more about indigenous cultures, ways, the truth and reconciliation movement, etc. Okay, look, on page 1, I'm just going to pretend like you have a copy of that. That's what I was begging for, that people would make themselves copies of the handouts. And I want to just touch on some things. I start out with an outline there, or a timeline, let's call it. A timeline, touching on the things we're going to go into more detail. I mentioned Neolithic indigenous peoples, way back, 10,000 BCE or 12,000 years ago. I mentioned African Bantu-speaking peoples. I mentioned Mesopotamian civilization, Polynesian Maori peoples, Egyptian civilization, two law codes that came from Mesopotamia and Babylonia, Ur-Nammu's code and Hammurabi's code. I mentioned the Maya civilization, Navajo high culture, and Iroquois confederacy, and the Inca civilization. So we're going to touch very briefly on these huge topics, but looking specifically at where did their concepts of justice come from? How were they formulated basically? And what maybe we might touch on some of the practices used in the realm of justice. You know, for better or worse, I think very broadly, so I'm always looking at as big a picture as I can find. So if you think about justice, concepts of social order are related to justice. Concepts of divine reality. How does the human world relate to the divine world? That has implications for justice. There are justice teachings in all religions. Almost every large worldview of any kind has some concept of order and the human place in that order. What's expected of us? What is our nature vis-a-vis higher nature? So that's the background from which we're looking at justice. What is it as a whole, and how has it evolved? And what are the family resemblances that we can find in the various systems? I'm a believer in family resemblances. I see them whether they're there or not. So I share that. It's like a bias. I see a lot more commonality in world religions and comparative philosophy and ethical systems than most people. And different minds work in different ways. So I'm perhaps overemphasizing the commonalities in worldviews and religions. Other people might want to emphasize the differences. There are differences. I think the differences are misinterpreted, however, if you forget the commonalities. So I always come back to, the big picture and the common ground, etc. You've heard of the blind man and the elephant. I think of religions as blind men in a way. They have a piece of the elephant, and the blind men should listen to each other, and they'd get a better sense of the reality of the elephant, or divine reality, if we did so. I can hardly get through a day without thinking about those blind men and the elephant. Some people are very weird. Okay, all of this is just to sort of give you, again, the frame of reference that at least I'm using to look at justice. I'm hoping you're bringing other ways, other issues, you'll get to share your observations about this and things that you think are more important than other things. That's why it's going to be a discussion. After I speak about another 10 minutes introducing the first 3 pages or so, then I want to hear any reactions you're having, and then I'd like to share more of the handout and hear more reactions. Go back and forth like that. Okay, under neolithic pan-indigenous concepts of justice, I mentioned this idea of a world tree. Oh my goodness, that archetype shows up a lot in looking at North American and looking at Eurasian indigenous people going way, way back. The world tree functions almost like scripture. It seems to be the source of the highest guidance. When you pay attention to what the tree is teaching you or providing you, it goes well. And when you deviate from that, you get in trouble. That's the basic idea of the world tree. And I give you some comments about the concept in general. I found a guy named Randy Woodley, an indigenous Cherokee scholar, who was looking at 40 or 50 different indigenous traditions in North America. And he was trying to come up with what he thought the overall guidance was. I think this guy spoke at Vancouver School of Theology, Randy Woodley, a couple of times. Anyway, so I put on the bottom of page 1 some of the things he found, which I think give us a clue about the basic indigenous concept of justice around the world over the last, say, 12,000 years or so. Concepts like this. So I'm just reading. One is respect for everyone and everything as sacred. 2 is seeking harmony. 3, increasing your friends and family. 4, laughing at yourself. My goodness. Humor is seen as something that brings balance and guidance to any group process. 5, everyone gets a say as we make decisions. Oh my goodness. Speak from your heart. Look forward by looking back. I have to admit, this one befuddled me at first, and then it was explained to me that tradition has wisdom, the past has wisdom in it. By really appreciating the wisdom of the past, we can make good decisions about the future. So that's looking forward by looking back. 8, work hard but rest well. 9, share what you have. And 10, we are all related. So these seem to be deep principles that a great many indigenous groups in North America, especially, but maybe in other parts of the world and back through time. They also look similar to me, and I've looked at African religion a little bit too. These seem similar to African guidance as well, which is what we're going to look at next. Okay, that was the first little subtopic of indigenous and ancient views. On page 2, it says ancient African concepts of justice. And it mentions a term that was given, or at least brought forward by Nelson Mandela. I think Nelson Mandela put Ubuntu on the map. It's a very ancient concept going back, we don't know how far back, among the Bantu-speaking peoples in Africa. Ubuntu means something like, I owe to the tribe a great deal because the tribe has given me so much. So it's a sense of communal solidarity as the basic of ethics and justice and law. A person is a person through other people in their tribe. And tribe, of course, can have loose boundaries. A tribe can be surrounded by other forms of life and other tribes as well. So Ubuntu is a sense of humanness and solidarity and ethical obligation to the tribe, a powerful concept. And it's also, this Ubuntu is pleasing to the Creator, pleasing to the Creator. And the Creator is named in many different ways. And Mungu is the term used in many of the Bantu peoples for the Creator. Ubuntu is pleasing to the Creator. Again, that's that same idea that I think I'm seeing everywhere, that concepts of law and justice ultimately go back to high religious teachings and come from a higher realm, however that realm is named. Okay, and then I give you 10 qualities or characteristics of the African traditional worldview. I want to alight on only one of them. The 7th one down there is called communal morality, or Ubuntu. And one author describes it this way: it's more collective than personal. So it's not so much a personal ethic as a collective or communal ethic, founded on rules, duty, and law, a structure which exercises considerable diffuse pressure. Prestigious and yet familiar roles are vital. Values assume concrete incarnation in the persons of ancestors, chiefs, elders, sages, seers, who are interpreters of the invisible. It's an ideal of sociological interdependence, expressing itself concretely through solidarity and a sense of responsibility to the tribal community. Okay, that's the essence, it seems, of African concepts of social order and justice. All right, I'm going to move to at least, one more, and then I'll stop and see if you have some reactions, and we'll look at a few more subtopics in the rest of the session. But let me turn to my page 3 of this handout for today. It says Ancient Polynesian Maori Concepts of Justice. Maori. I never could quite get the pronunciation. Maybe you've been to New Zealand and know how to say it. It's fascinating to me. I had heard of restorative justice maybe a few years ago. And I talked to a woman who I knew who taught law. And I said, speak to me of restorative justice. And she said, it came from the Maori people, Western appreciation of the Maori and other indigenous people. And then I tried to research it myself, and that's what I kept getting. Restorative justice seems to have been inspired by the Maori approach as well as other indigenous approaches to justice in North America, where we live. Okay, but looking specifically at Maori going back, say, 5,000 years or so in what we call New Zealand, the highest reality are the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, who advocate utu, meaning the path to justice and restoration of balance. When something goes wrong, we want to put it right again and come into balance again. So the expectation of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother are justice, which means keeping our world balanced, keeping social stability and equilibrium. I'm looking at the last set of notes under ancient Polynesian Maori concepts. It says addressing wrongs. How do they address wrongs? Elders, or as they're called, holders of knowledge. Elders are holders of knowledge, help us share accounts of abuse. What went wrong? They bring it out of us so that healing can occur and the community can restore harmony. All communities members can take part. Oh my goodness, the courtroom, so to speak, can be anyone in the community who wants to participate. Elders help people address wrongs. They're the holders of knowledge. Utu, or restoration of balance, is the goal, which usually requires some kind of physical and spiritual action or ceremonial gesture, or perhaps making amends of some kind. All of that brings about healing. So that's the general idea. Restoration as the key concept in bringing about justice. Okay, we're going to look later on at the Navajo version of this and the Iroquois version of this as well. And you'll see, again, thick family resemblances with a little more detail about how the process of bringing justice to the community works. You could call it healing. That's another word you could use to describe the process. In fact, there's a wonderful book that I put in my bibliography there, and I'm looking for the title of it here. Yeah, I mentioned in the page 2 of the first handout, Wanda McCaslin edited a book called Justice as Healing, Indigenous Ways. Justice as Healing, Indigenous Ways. I think if this course were a real course that had, required reading, that might be one of them, to look at some of the essays in that particular book, Justice as Healing, Indigenous Ways. Okay, any comments? People might want to introduce themselves. If you want to share very briefly how much Indigenous contact you have and experience, that would be wonderful. Dory, you might go any second now, so
No,
maybe I
I'll
can just
stay,
call
Harold.
on.
No, I'll stay. I'm here.
You're staying.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us about, any observation you have on any reaction to what I've shared so far, or something of your experience with Indigenous people, if you're willing. You can pass.
Are you asking me directly or the group?
Oh, I was starting, I'm picking on
Oh,
you
gotcha. Okay.
to model this, and then I'll
Love
pick
it.
on other people, but they can pass,
Thank
you can
you.
always say later, call me later or not at all, and I'm just listening. Anyway, yeah, Dora Lee.
I grew up in eastern South Dakota, the land of the Lakota and Dakota peoples, and I didn't know anything about Indigenous First Nations. In America. They call it, Native Americans. And it wasn't until I moved to Canada in my 20s. I mean, there was kids at school that I went to school with who were part of the local, First Nations communities. There were people around, like there was reservations, there were the church community that my stepfather belonged to had outreach programs to one of the local reservations. I mean, it was kind of there, but I didn't have any concept of what it meant to be in relationship with people who were from the land and we were settlers. My families had been on that land for like 3 generations. So this is a lot of unpacking for me since I moved to Canada like 20 something years ago, and the conversation around reconciliation, it has more and more over the last 2 decades become more present to all of us, and in the invitation to be accountable and to be in a place of curiosity and inquiry and be participants in healing. It's definitely in a part of my kind of present awareness of what that means for me right now. I guess as somebody who works in the healthcare system, which has in a terrible history of oppression with the Indigenous peoples of Canada, and still many continue to face suffering in ways that as a white settler I have no idea of, but I continue to try to do the work of like believing people, first of all, when they're saying how hard it is for them to navigate the systems and how their bodies and their spirits respond when they're in the medical system. So I feel like there's a responsibility to be uplifting the practice of decolonial work within a structure that was built from a colonial framework. So it's these things are very dear to my heart. I work in palliative care, and I'm working with occasionally Indigenous clients and trying to support and uplift their own personal practices through, and be really a student and being educated by the language that people have about walking home or walking to the next home, or the language that is just maybe very different than I might have experienced before. So I know these are some, I just kind of on the spot to think about, like it's
Yeah, no, Dorley, this is wonderful. I wanted to give you a bigger turn than most people. I just want,
oh sorry.
that's okay, because no, I knew you were at VST and had processed this a lot, and you're using terms like colonial and settler. Yeah, so you've been basking in this challenge quite a while. I just want to call on people
That's my
briefly to,
okay.
yeah, so anything you want to say. So, yeah, okay, Donna, please, yeah.
Oh, is my audio on? Yes. I just wanted to, these are just a cluster of thoughts. First and foremost is how I appreciate this opportunity to explore this topic, not from a Eurocentric point of view, not from just the 20th century or the 19th, 20th, 21st century, but going all the way back. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I thank you so much, Harold. Here are some things that because this is my first session. I did catch up and went through some of the material early of the first handouts, but it strikes me, this is maybe very superficial, maybe a surface, but this goes back forever and ever to almost recorded humanity, okay, this concept of justice. And through all cultures and religions, again, backwards, forwards to today, and we have failed. We have failed so miserably. We don't even seem to get a little bit better by the each millennia, you know. So I'm sort of thinking, let's try to figure out why. That's one little pocket. The other little pocket is this whole thing about commonalities, the world tree, all of that, again, common to all times and all religions. It seems to me one of the things that's counteracting the positive, the benefit, the desirability of justice is the very opposite. If you want to use yin yang, it's the self, it's the ego, it's the individual. And that seems so dominant in Western democratic kind of ideas of success. Success is prosperity. Success is getting on top. Instead of we are all one, we are all linked. We're not the same as in carbon copies, but we have so much more in common than we do the opposite. And I'm interested in trying to figure out how we can get a little better at this, being human beings on this planet.
Wow, everything you're saying is wonderful and foundational to this whole enterprise. I'm really glad you got in here, Donna. I'm glad to see you again.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna call it on people. You can briefly respond. There's a hand up, Roz. Yeah. Oh, you're muted right now.
Thank you. I'm a little concerned, not concerned, just thinking that when we
That's
talk about
okay.
indigenous and non-indigenous, we are looking at differences. And um, for justice, we can't look at differences. We like you said before, look at similarities or communalities. And I've always had on my wall the inaugural speech of Nelson Mandela, because you have mentioned him before. And I just wanted to quote from his speech. It speaks to us. Um, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel secure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God. That is within us. It is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give their people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And there's something about justice in there, I
Yeah,
think.
thank you so much. I like to think that what Nelson Mandela has done is universalize Ubuntu, right? So that everything you say there is sort of showing how this applies to all people everywhere in any tribe, right? But so in other words, yeah, Ubuntu meaning being at one with your tribe. It depends on how big your tribe is. So in a course like this, we're looking across the ages at the concepts of justice. How large were those circles? Who was included? Under what conditions did the circles get bigger as to who our justice obligations extended to? Okay, I'm going to call on Elaine. Any or Bill, briefly, yeah. Well, any
Okay.
reaction? Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I'm Bill Griffith from Seattle. I wasn't here last time. I was actually on the ocean. But
Mhm.
yeah, I've had uh, uh, contacts with in several different parts of the country with indigenous people. I lived for many years in New Mexico, where you have uh, three major indigenous groups: the Apaches, you have the Pueblo people, and you have the Navajos. And the indigenous people don't approach 10%, but they're like 3 or 4% of the population. And it was when New Mexico became part of the United States, there was actually a melding of really three different sort of justice systems coming from the Spaniards, the tribes, and the um, uh, uh, the Americans. And many of the older concepts, because it was a matter of international treaty and recognizing what had uh, been involved in the settling of New Mexico for the previous 400 years, got encoded into the law. So many of those old systems, particularly of property ownership, got um, uh, incorporated there, and a persist and give I think the indigenous voices at least, if not more power, at least a recognition of the need to take into account their systems. The other places where I've encountered indigenous peoples, of course, here in Washington State. I've been involved as an advisor with 3 different groups here: the Swinomish, the Umatilla, and one of the Skolem groups, primarily advising on health and environmental issues. If I had to characterize the experience in one way, it's that the indigenous groups here devote an amazing amount of their resources, over which they have say, to the restoration of the environment here. Some of these groups, or well, a number of them, will devote 70% of their discretionary funds to this revival or of the whole environment here in the Puget Sound area.
Bill, thank you so much. I'm going to move on, but you're making me realize a bunch of things. This course has to include the environment, and
Yeah.
indigenous people are putting it on our map in an incredible way. And so I realize as we study justice across the ages, it's the eco-justice starts to come in again. It was obviously part of justice in the older ancient systems, and then we lost it somehow, right? And now we're regaining it. I'm gonna, yeah, oh, okay, Elaine, one more person, and then I want to go back to showing you some of the material, and then at the end we'll save more time for a general discussion. Elaine, yeah, Elaine.
Yeah, just a little story about ecological justice and the Native people's power and commitment, as Bill was saying. While I was on the island, I was advising to one of the colleges there, and it had a quite uprising Indigenous curriculum and Indigenous services. And the whole institution was becoming much more conscious of its Indigenous roots, I'll say, that are there for everyone. So at that time, I heard from one fellow who comes from a particular tribe that surrounded a watershed. The tribe had lived forever around this watershed. And one of the logging companies in BC clear cut the whole thing. Clear cut the whole watershed to see how long regrowth would take. So he and his tribe, who are all over the municipalities, get together every weekend surrounding this watershed and pray for it. And it had restored in 10 years what they expected would happen in, I don't know, 50 to 100. He had been at it for 10 years. And he said the foresters could not believe how this tribe was regrowing their traditional land. Just wanted to share that.
Yeah, what a beautiful story. My goodness. So in some justice systems, obviously the earth and the plants and the animals are in the justice system. They require the care. They're in the part of the tribal solidarity includes all those other beings. I wanted to, we're looking at 9 subtopics, and I want to mention 2 of them very quickly and show you they're different. See, I'm touching quickly on ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Now, those are different because those are part of, when you study Western history, you end up saying, oh, okay, Mesopotamia and Egyptian civilization are civilizations of the type that we recognize later on. in the West or in India or in China. But regarding those two, there were certain angles on law that I quickly want to mention. I'm at the bottom of page 3 of today's handout, Ancient Mesopotamian Concepts of Justice, mentioning these two law codes, Ur-Nammu's code and Hammurabi's code. Probably all of us heard about Hammurabi's code in our social studies classes or history classes. Ur-Nammu's code's a little bit earlier, and it aimed at equity in the land. So that's 2100 BCE. We're talking over 4,000 years ago. A system needed to bring about equity in the land, inspired by Enlil, who's one of the high gods, with a portfolio of universal law, the establisher of universal law. That's who Enlil is. And the law system had to be pleasing to Enlil. Then you go to Hammurabi. He had a sun god, Shamash, who was in charge of justice too. So Hammurabi's code is designed to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. And it's called a law code because it has like 200 laws chiseled into stone, with specific, punishments. Anyway, so that's quickly a view of something that ends up in Western history, looking at civilizations and their law codes. Now I want to quickly go back to indigenous things. So on page 4 of my notes for today, at the bottom it says Ancient Mayan Concepts of Justice, Ancient Mayan. Okay, only a little bit about this. Again, I'm looking for the highest authority in each of these traditions, or the highest reality. So the Mayans has this concept of, it's called Kukulkan in one language system, Quetzalcoatl in another. You could call that a deity, but what is the portfolio of the deity? I'm always looking at that. What's the job description of the deity? And this is an amazing. So this justice is administered, this Quetzalcoatl, I'm going to call him that because that's the most common name used in Central American religion. That deity is the divine light, wisdom, justice, and mercy. Occasionally, there would be a priest, or you might say an incarnation of Quetzalcoatl, who's also called Quetzalcoatl. So it's hard to sort all this out historically, but generally, that's the nature of reality, that or highest reality. It's about wisdom, and it's about justice, and it's about mercy. Okay. Kings, of course, were believed to have semi-divine status. That's like the pharaohs in Egypt. And the people, the royal scribes, were called keepers of holy books. I think we're making progress in our understanding of the language and symbol system of the Central American civilizations. And that's going to really open up much wider understanding. But in the meantime, I simply wanted to mention, again, we have this cosmic hierarchy with concepts of justice coming from on high. Okay, I'm jumping to quickly Navajo. It's on page 5, section 7 of the 9 sections we're looking at. Now, I picked this one because it seems to me very well developed in terms of what we today call restorative justice, which is, you might say Western justice and indigenous justice, add them up and divide by 2, and you have restorative justice. It's sort of like in the middle. That's one way of thinking about it. So here's a quick summary of some of the concepts. I'm looking at the bottom half of page 5 under Navajo concepts. Confrontation and coercion are avoided. I'm reading my notes. They avoid them. Confrontation and coercion are avoided when addressing misbehavior and crime. Instead, there's a talking things out. I'm using the notes of this Navajo writer, talking things out, and an attempt to balance freedom with responsibility. Oh my goodness. An offender is viewed as someone who acts as if he has no relatives. He acts as if he has no relatives. And if you had relatives, your relatives would keep you in line. They would guide you. They would care for you. They would love you. But occasionally someone acts as if he doesn't have any relatives. Interesting description. Problems are addressed by, quote, peacemakers. That's what they're called. That is to say, elders who, and this is what they're like, they speak well, they plan well, they bear themselves well, that is with dignity, and they can provide guidance. Both men and women can serve as peacemakers. The people who are gathered for problem solving and healing are called the judges, all of them. Wow. See, again, thick family resemblances between this indigenous approach and other ones we've heard. But then they have a more detailed 6 steps. Look at these. Prayer. Start out with prayer. The spirit world is asked for help. So you're asking for the wisdom and guidance of the ancestors and other deities to help you. Then there's an open expression of feelings. Step 2, emotions, concerns, opinions are freely allowed and encouraged. Then 3, traditional guidance. So that peacemaker or elder then shares some stories and traditions that seem to bear on the issue at hand, containing laws and lessons relevant to the situation. Okay, prayer, expressing feelings, and then thirdly, traditional guidance. Fourth, the longest part, open discussion. The families and the people involved, that is the judges, explore what traditional principles have been violated and what were the causes leading to this violation of traditional wisdom. Wow. Then a process 5 they call reconciliation. The process and goal are restorative, not punitive. They're trying to bring about healing, reconciliation, restoration, rather than judgment or exile or any of those extreme measures. And so the last part is called consensual planning, but it also ends up with a justice and harmony ceremony of some kind. So consensual planning, everyone plans together, building on the wisdom that has been shared that seems to provide a solution or an amending process. And you celebrate that in some kind of justice and harmony ceremony. So you might say those are 6 or 7 steps that is fairly well laid out, that are the means of dealing with confrontation. Wow, very, very impressive. Okay, so I want to show you, then we'll look at 8 and 9. We'll look at section 8 and 9. The Iroquois, I think I can pronounce this correctly. Haudenosaunee. You might have heard it that way, or the Iroquois Confederacy. This is how we learned about it in my American social studies courses. And this had a founder, and we now know this goes back much further than we thought. I remember that learning that the Iroquois Confederacy started in around 1500 or 1600. We now are pretty sure it goes back to 1142 because there was some sort of a eclipse that happened then that was part of the founding story of Deganawida, who's also called Peacemaker. He's the founder, and he was a Huron. That shows you how far east. It's now associated with New York area and in eastern Canada, but it started out there in the Huron area. 5 tribes were united, in effect, in this confederacy. The Mohawk, Oneida, Cayuga, Seneca, Onondaga, and later on the Tuscarora. And the key figures are this founder, Deganawida, who met Hiawatha, a chief of one of the very aggressive tribes. The 2 of them converted a figure called the Mother of Nations, a woman that was influencing various warring tribes. They converted her to this new peace message. And then in the middle here, I have the words that we are pretty sure Deganawida actually spoke. The peacemaker or the founder of the Iroquois Confederacy, he's summarizing the ideals of this system. Okay, so I'm reading it. These are his words. This message has 3 parts: righteousness and health and power. And each part has 2 branches. Righteousness means justice practiced between men and between nations. It also means a desire to see justice prevail. Okay, so that's all about, let's say, justice and righteousness. Then he says health means soundness of mind and body, but it also means peace, for that is what comes when minds are sane and bodies are cared for. That's the second piece. So there's righteousness and justice, health and peace. Now, power, he says, means authority, the authority of law and custom, backed by the force necessary to make justice prevail. Power also means religion, for justice enforced is the will of the holder of the heavens. The holder of the heavens, isn't that a beautiful name for divine reality? And then Deganawida says, our system, will take the form of the longhouse with many fires and families under one chief mother. So there's a different chief mother for all the longhouses. Wow. Incidentally, that chief mother had the power to impeach a chief. Think about that. She has the power to impeach a chief. That's where we got the word impeachment, I think, in North America. I'm going back to Deganawida's words here. 5 nations, each with its own council fire, shall live together as one household in peace. They shall have one mind and live under one law. Thinking shall replace killing, and there shall be one commonwealth. So this is a magnificent system of federalism or justice. To tell you how, this is underrepresented in world history. Apparently, Karl Marx knew about the Iroquois Confederacy and considered it worthy of study, and saying, if we want to study justice, we should look at the Iroquois Confederacy. My goodness. So I think it has to be some kind of prejudice that this hasn't received way more attention, in North American education. Although some people have heard about it and know a fair amount about it. You may have heard of Peacemaker or Daganawida and Hiawatha and the Mother of Nations and the federal system. You're like 3 levels, the local, the regional, and then the national, or the whole conspiracy, the whole confederacy. And ideally, you could keep going until this covered the whole world. What if all nations were part of some kind of confederacy operating like this? Baha'i perspective is that is what's going to happen. Something like a confederacy or a federal system will emerge. Humanity will see the value of that at some point in history. We're going to bring that up again in session 8. So that's a sneak preview. Hang in here until we get to session 8. We're going to talk about some fascinating things, including omniculturalism. Roz mentioned, why are you talking about differences? Omniculturalism says you should start out any discussion looking at commonalities or the common ground of human nature. Then later on, you can bring up differences, but start from common ground. That's an educational perspective called omniculturalism. It's also a social justice perspective. Anyway, that's a concept we look at in the 8th session as well. Okay, and then one more paragraph I want to share about the Iroquois. It's 2/3 of the way down on page 6 of today's handout. There are 4 aspects of growth and wholeness: mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. Those should sound very familiar, those 4 aspects. They're part of the medicine wheel, part of what we call holistic health, holism, which is a very indigenous early view that humanity had of human nature. So we can grow in 4 areas: the mental, the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual, and they should all interrelate and work together. Here's what they say. I'm quoting from this essay about the Iroquois. People who act in inappropriate or hurtful ways are fully responsible to take actions to restore their balance with themselves and their balance with the tribe or the people. The connections between spiritual and material realms are revealed in the great law of peace. That's the name of the message that Deganawida revealed, you might say, and taught, the great law of peace. Those who cause sickness, disunity, and death are in violation of core principles. The amending process involves ceremonial self-sacrifice and community peacemaking, similar to what we mentioned goes on in the Navajo tradition, the similar process. Okay, and then sometimes specific crimes are mentioned and specific sanctions are proposed, but all of that is open to discussion. A little bit like the Navajos saying anyone who is related to either, the one who did the harm or received the harm, anyone related to either of them can participate in a meaningful way. Okay, friends, one more thing I want to mention Indigenous-wise, and then open it up again to all comments and questions you may have. And this is the Inca of South America. At one point, I didn't realize how significant they were. The Inca civilization drew on all the other cultures and civilizations of South America. I didn't quite realize that. So they were absorbing, you might say, the best parts of many other cultures, including the Tiahuanaco. That was another, important South American indigenous tradition. So I'm mentioning here, they have a god called Viracocha, the creator of the universe, also identified with the sun and with time or history, with the earth and with humanity and civilization. A rather important portfolio for a god named Viracocha. And I'm reading at the very top, the cosmology was hierarchical and dualistic meaning physical and spiritual, leading to a centralized bureaucracy led by divine heads of state, whose power was associated with the sun. Some populations were conquered and others were forcibly resettled, but overall, there was an ethic of reciprocity and cooperation among differentiated social roles. I reread what they meant by conquered. The Inca kept growing larger and saying, we have a very well-developed legal system that's very fair, and we'll make sure you'll have food during the hard times. So you should join our growing Incan civilization. This is more like annexing. I mean, I've seen that term used in the way Darius and Cyrus the Great grew the Persian Empire, more like annexing than conquering. You're sort of making people realize, through discussion, and sometimes through a little bit of force, that it would be better for all parties concerned if you joined us and we worked together to take care of the needs of a larger group. That's how Inca civilization grew. It's also how the Persian Empire grew. But we'll look at that in session 4 when we look at ancient Persia and also Islam. Okay, here I'm reading a little bit about Viracocha, the third paragraph down on page 7. They worshipped a high god with various names, descriptions, assistants. This divine being became best known as Viracocha, the foam of the sea, the creator god, the one who exists from the beginning of the world to its end. South American cultures believed that Viracocha had occasionally been embodied as a wise man with a beard who wore a long robe and carried a staff, traveling and teaching many peoples the arts of civilization. I studied the job description of Viracocha and the job description of Quetzalcoatl, and they're strikingly similar. And they also mentioned this idea of sometimes wore a robe and had a beard. And when you hear stories like that, you start to think, did somebody in the lost tribes of Israel go over there and operate as some kind of a prophet? I think the Latter-day Saints have a story, something like that. In any case, what I see as family resemblances, the concept of a prophet who incarnates the wisdom of higher reality, however named, and it can have the same name, Quetzalcoatl as God or Viracocha as God, and then those two names also as the teacher, capital T, or the prophet who bestows new knowledge on humanity and generates a larger civilization. Very, very fascinating. So I'm jumping down to the bottom here, last two paragraphs of my 7th page on the Inca. The Inca restored, maintained, and unified a vast and pre-existing array of peoples, cultures, religions. What they were able to accomplish without the use of the wheel, without iron products, without tokens of currency, and without a written language has amazed and bewildered Western observers. You know, I know you've heard of Machu Picchu. People who go to Machu Picchu see stones that are very, very big, that fit together precisely. How would you make such stones fit precisely without some sort of iron tools? You know, people who ponder that, you know, go half crazy. One kind of explanation is there was revelatory knowledge available. This is Harold's hypothesis, that human beings don't necessarily learn everything by the accidents of empirical research. They don't necessarily stumble on seeds that grow certain things or metals that are in the earth, or learn techniques, you know, by the school of hard knocks. Some of it might be revealed to them by these so-called prophets. Anyway, that's a hypothesis that I think opens up some possibilities for understanding. You might have heard of a guy named Graham Hancock, who's written about 10 books talking about, you know, ancient, that he thinks civilization is much older than 6,000 years ago. That's what we get in the textbooks, that it's much, much older. I completely agree with him. The evidence is mounting up that civilization goes back much, much further, that humanity probably got some kind of guidance, you know, through these prophet-like figures that were what we would call technology and science, included with morality and spiritual wisdom. So the ancient revelations might include what we call science, ethics, and religion. Again, that's a hypothesis, but you know, you have to be impressed with the Inca, you know, for their sheer size and the organizational work, and doing this without seemingly a written language. They had some sort of rope system with knots that seemed to be symbolic in some way. Maybe there's another one, but we don't seem to know what their written system was. Okay, and they had the different gods of the different peoples they incorporated were, the chief gods were associated with the sun. Like there was a god called the oculate being, like the giant eye that sees all things. Inti was the name of some of the earlier sun gods, but the sun is not just the sun. It's like the source of light, source of warmth, the source of love. So a deity representing the sun is usually the highest deity or among the highest deities. And then the rulers are guided by the sun, right? There's always that connection. So again, that's a similar family resemblances, a hierarchy of reality. You find it in all civilizations. The rulers are in touch with higher reality, and they teach what they learn to other teachers who end up guiding the society in its agricultural and technological and moral and spiritual forms. You know, I think I skipped over Egypt. I have to quickly digress to Egypt. There was a pair of gods there named Ma'at, that's the female one, and Thoth, the male one. Together, their portfolio was justice. And they said things like this, that before you die, you should make amends with all the people you've ever harmed. You know, it's sort of fun, like in the lower mainland, this would be if we had that same religion. Before you die, you have to make amends with everybody that you harmed in Surrey and Langley and West Vancouver and North Vancouver and Richmond and New Westminster. So literally, Ma'at and Thoth taught, you know, to get ready for eternal life, you have to clean up your moral act. And this is the way to do it. They were weighers of the heart. That was their title. Ma'at and Thoth, weighers of the heart, meaning weighers of your good and bad deeds. So they were you could say, the architectural founders of the justice system in ancient Egypt. Anyway, I'm sorry I skipped over those, but so I mentioned Mesopotamia and those two law codes and Egypt. See, that's part of the Western, story of the emergence of civilizations. But it's hard not to see a lot of family resemblances with the indigenous systems as well. They too have higher reality that is mediated to people, and it ends up creating some kind of a legal and social mores system. Okay, that's a summary of today's session, and I'm hoping it stimulated some thoughts, questions, perplexities. You're allowed to disagree too. Truth is big, and we're just blind men checking out the elephant anyway. Any comment? Who didn't I call on before? You might want to take a turn, like people like Baxter and Linda and Matthew, Nancy, Bob.
I know Nevaeh wanted to share at some point earlier.
Oh, please, Nevaeh, you're back. Please, yeah. Or Tani, I call her too. She's in Ontario. Wow, this is a very interprovincial gathering. Yeah, anything you want to say, Nevaeh Tani?
Yeah. Tani's kind of a nickname, but it's also an official name. So we're close. So it's okay for you to call me by my nickname. Anyway, a couple of comments. I put a link into the chat for people to look at an Indo-centric perspective, let's put it that way. Just as Europeans can be ethnocentric about their worldview, sometimes it seems to me, being born in an Indian culture, that I hear a lot of alternate stories about origins of spiritual belief in many parts of the world, not just in India. And only recently did I find out about evidence of Hindu priests who traveled the world not to conquer, but to act as advisors, spiritual advisors. And they were often adopted by the monarchs of the day, or the tribal leaders of the day as advisors. And they left their mark in different parts of the world. Now, I was brought up in Canada. All my education is in Canada. So I also have a Eurocentric view from my Western education. However, I've always had this other access to all this other information. And only now, because India is now a growing superpower, are they making their knowledge more public. So I could only find this Hindupedia reference by going to yahoo.in, different domain. There you find all kinds of information that we never hear about in the Western world. So what was really interesting to me is that that this idea that there's another way of people having contact and influence power, right? Not to overthrow, overtake land, but that out of curiosity, and which is a very human thing to do as we expand our consciousness, we want to go beyond our borders and explore different lands. And when we go and explore, what is our intention? Is it to rule, overthrow, dominate, or is it to get along, share, advise? And what I found out is that, there's so much evidence of Hindu seafarers who went to share their spiritual beliefs and were adopted as these spiritual advisors to many different parts of the world. The one that I put in the link that I put tells you about many regions, but I put it there when I heard you mention about Incas. You know how there's always been some mystery around the Easter Island statues?
Yeah.
Those big statues? Well, just last month I heard a Indocentric view of that. I'm saying centric because I don't know. It was so long ago. It's hard for me to, but I'm weighing it against what we hear here.
Tani,
Anyway,
I gotta ask you, I want
for
to
yourself.
comment. Tani, what everything you're saying is perfect for 2 weeks from now. When we're looking at India and China, right? Although it's great that you're saying it now, you're expanding our borders and you're saying similarities between how the Inca spread and maybe how Indian rulers spread into Southeast Asia and that sort of thing. But I want to try to focus us a little bit more on indigenous that we've
That's what
looked
I was
at for
trying
this
to
session and
say.
see if there are other comments on
Yeah.
that. Any other comments
Anyway,
on? Yeah, so
yeah.
maybe I
Sorry
hope you
about
understand
that.
what I'm saying. You're
Yeah, I
talking about,
understand. I
okay.
understand. I was trying to make the point that there is evidence of Hindu influence on spiritual beliefs in the indigenous tribes of South America and in North
Okay.
America. That's
Okay.
you
Thank
can read the link for yourself.
Thank you so much. Wow, you are talking about what we're talking about. Okay, indigenous in the Americas, North, South, and Central. All right. Any other comments, observations, complaints, new worldviews? Maybe I'll call on people who haven't said anything yet, and you can always pass. But people who didn't get, Baxter, you didn't get introduced during the first set of introductions.
No, thank you, Harold. No, nice to be here. I have kind of two thoughts on what we've talked about today. First is only bad things happen fast. Car crashes happen fast. House fires happen fast. You shoot somebody, they die fast. But it takes a long time to raise a child or build a house. Good things happen slow, and they happen incrementally. Now, I was interested when Roz was speaking about about the tending to view things from a racial point of view being just even if it's intended as justice, it is still inclines to draw lines between people. And I was thinking, although I agree in principle with Roz, but I think that things are incremental and you have to go in steps. Because only bad things happen fast. Justice applied immediately is tyranny. But if you start with small steps, maybe now we need to address the difference because it's so glaring. So maybe we have to speak in terms of the difference between the different races. It's not ideal, but it's a first step towards the ultimate goal of being able to speak freely without any reference whatever to color of skin. But as I say, I think it has to be incremental because only bad things happen fast. And
I have to comment on this. Oh my, Roz, what I wanted to tell you earlier, and thank you so much, Baxter, for this interesting perspective. But when I mention differences of culture, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say really good stuff came from those different cultures, right? I'm not trying to make people hate each other. I'm trying to make people love each other across cultural and racial and historical boundaries. So for example, I helped with a curriculum on world religions for the public schools. We totally emphasized the positive contributions of their cultures. We didn't talk about how they cut themselves up into sectarian doctrines, that they imposed their beliefs on other people, that they initiated war. We didn't talk about all that. Yes, that's true, but the approach was to emphasize positive differences that are also very similar. So we're looking at justice in this course, which is generally a very good idea, very powerful, and looking at how it sort of seemed, what shape it took. How did it originate and develop in other parts of the world? So yes, that's looking at differences, but it's really emphasizing common ground. And it's motivated to bring about respect between, cultural traditions, religious traditions that may seem different in one way and can be shown to be quite similar in another way. You know, the simple thing about the golden rule, I mean, people learn that there's a golden rule all over the place. Well, it goes way deeper than that. And the golden rule is in cultural traditions as well as religious and moral and ethical traditions. So some kind of sense of reciprocity is really universal, you know, everywhere. I remember trying to get this across to sixth graders once, and I said, "Why do you think the golden rule looks so similar all over the world?" And a young lady, you know, sixth grader says, "Because it was taught. It started somewhere, and then it was taught to the next region and the next region and the next region, and then everyone knew about the golden rule after all that teaching went on." And I said, "That's a very interesting idea. There's some people that write a lot of books that agree with you." Then someone else, a kid, a boy says, "I have another idea. The guy in the sky taught it to all people." The guy in the sky. This was his explanation. And again, that's another very powerful hypothesis of how the golden rule or common moral ground might have gotten so widely distributed. You know, so anyway, that kind of thing could be in the background of our minds when we look at justice systems. Why are they so similar in some ways, and what are some of the interesting differences? I think there is a difference between indigenous approaches to justice and the colonial approach to justice. We're going to try to get more light on that as we go through this course. We're trying to inoculate ourselves in these first 4 sessions against Eurocentrism. On the 5th one, I want to look at Western contributions to justice ideas. So that's Jewish, Jewish, Greco-Roman, and Christian contributions to justice. That'll feel more like home to many of us. And then in the next session, look at this thing called international law, which grew out of the colonial era, you know, when the countries with big boats that started to explore and trade with the world set up justice systems that we call that, you know, but so the guy who started that, Hugo Grotius, a Dutch thinker, theologian, and lawyer, statesman, is considered the founder of international law, but that's from the Western point of view. I couldn't find, and maybe Tani's going to help us, an Indocentric concept of the founding of international law. Maybe there is such a thing, or a Chinese centric version of international law, or an Islamic version of international law. There may be such things, but there's a well-developed body called, you know, the study of international law beginning around 1625. That's what our session 6 would look at. And then session 7, we look at Baha'i concepts related to social order, justice, and law. And in the 8th session, the last one, we're looking at contemporary concepts of justice and future concepts, you know, including things like world federalism, eco-justice, looking at important documents like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, systems of international law that seem to have some kind of futuristic thrust to them. That's what we'll look at at the end, including the earth, especially environmental movements, the contributions made in the environmental movement to concepts of justice. Donna, please, hi.
Just occurs to me listening to you that maybe it comes down to some words, but rather than talking about international law, which is based on nations, nation states, or cultural, maybe we're looking for something that is more like universal law.
Universal law. Oh, that's even better.
You know, because I don't know what it's going to look like, probably, you know, before, after my time on this planet, but it seems to me part of the problems is that we're in nation states or nation clusters. And if we think more in terms of universal humanitarian laws, then maybe we might get somewhere.
You know, when we get to there, you'll see that there's a family of thinkers who say something like There can't be any international law. There's only a bunch of national laws that then get expanded from one to the next one to the next one to the. So that's one point of view. And then there's other ones that have a more monistic. That's what legal monism means. All law anywhere is part of the universal system that hasn't been developed yet, and we're en route to it right now. So that's more like what you're saying, Donna. Then they call it, yeah, universal or monistic. Okay, friends, time flies when you're having fun. We only have a few minutes left. Is there any really quiet person who hasn't said anything yet that has some gem of wisdom that we all need to hear? Or anything else? A complaint, a question, an observation, something we've missed. Matthew, how are you doing? You're smiling. That's a good sign.
I'm basking in Baxter's justice applied immediately is tyranny. Maybe that's what I came to collect today. So I'm resonating with that.
Excellent. That was a blockbuster.
That was a blockbuster. Good stuff. I happen to be a Lutheran pastor who's licensed in the Diocese of New Westminster as a priest, and my regular sort of ministry is with Donna at Christ Church Cathedral, and that is a culture that is that's suffused in, and rightly so, in sort of a posture of repentance and consideration and reconciliation for the long and tragic wickedness that's been perpetrated over the first peoples of this country. And so I guess this is part of my, as somebody responsible for leadership in that context, to learn more about how that happens and what went wrong and what could be engineered to go better in the future.
Fantastic. That's music to my ears. So the Lutherans and Anglicans are working together for Indigenous justice. My goodness.
Yes.
That's really great. Okay, anyone else who didn't get a chance to say anything or make a complaint, a polite one or anything like that, something we're missing? Next week, so 2 weeks, oh, wait, next session is not 2 weeks from now, is it? It's December 14th. Yeah,
That's
so
right,
we have
3 weeks
one,
from now.
we have one, that's 3 weeks from now. No, 2 weeks from now.
Well, this month has an extra weekend in it. It's not just 4, it's a fifth weekend. So
Okay.
we'll start into December. So December 14th is our next gathering.
December 14th, and then we have to jump to the new year to get back on the every other Saturday routine till the end. Okay, anything else anyone wants to say? I wanted this to be more conversational because you people are, this is a combination of sort of diversity-oriented people or unity in diversity-oriented people and social activists and justice advocates. We're lucky. Baxter, your hand's up again.
Thank you, Harold. I don't want to monopolize here, but I
You've
did have
done
a second observation was, and this is in the form of a question to you, I guess. We often look at the commonality of social structures across the globe in ancient peoples, and we seek to justify that by finding teachers who traveled and spread these concepts and everything else. And I'm wondering if maybe we're not looking for something, we're creating something that isn't there. I'm thinking possibly these concepts of justice, which are so common around the globe, are inherent and essential within the human creature. And so they naturally come out as opposed to necessarily being spread, although I'm not. So it's a question. I'm not putting forth a hypothesis here.
Confucius agrees with you. We have an inborn, innate sense of justice and propriety, but he says we lose it, and then we have to be re-educated. Fascinating idea. Yeah, that's a big question. Nurture, nature, when it comes to justice concepts. Okay, thank you, people. This has been wonderful, and so we'll meet again December 14th, and I'll send you immediately, or I'll send somebody. Yeah, I'll send Rachel the handout for the third session, and she'll send it to you. about a week ahead. And that's going to be a big piece, 10 pages. Oh my God, on India and China. Plus, we're going to have Nive Tana offering the Indo-centric point of view on a lot of stuff. Oh my goodness, our cup runneth over. All right, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Harold.
Thank you,
Harold.
Harold. Thanks, Dorley. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Blessings on your day. Thank you.